but we're going to be talking about some legal things. So, what are we going to be talking about today? Well, I've got some 4 main topics, and then we're going to have some discussion and questions. We're going to be talking about what are third-party apps. Most people assume they know what they are, but we're going to make sure so we're all on the same page when we talk about third-party apps. Then we're going to look at some security best practices for third-party apps. There's several out there, and we're going to talk about a little bit about what standards are and why we use best practices in that section. And then we're going to look at some of the changes that Google came about with that happened on October 23rd that spurred this topic in the first place. And so we're going to look at it, and I've got a little demo of what I deal with at the co-op. I have academies, which academies are where they send students that school districts don't want to deal with much anymore, and they need some help. And so we have a Focus Academy, we have a Flex Academy, and we have an Explore Academy. So I have students, and so I deal with those students, and I deal with the Google app peaks all the time. So I'm going to show you what I deal with, and we'll talk about what you deal with, and maybe we can work something out there. And then we're going to talk about team effort, what is needed for third-party app management, and we're going to talk about team effort and what each team member is responsible for and how we can help spur that culture on our campus. So does that seem like what you kind of want to talk about? I'll have to be honest, when they first gave me this topic, I didn't have a clue which way to go with it. So I used Bard. Have you ever used Bard? It's the AI from Google. You do bard.google.com. I put in my topic. It came up with a nice outline. And I would have used that, but it was more teacher-oriented. So I kind of went from that and pieced some more pieces. So this first part, I had to attribute to Bard, because he kind of helped me, or maybe she will, he or she helped me with this first part. So we're going to talk a little bit about what third-party apps are. Now here's some popular ones that my teachers use quite a bit. And by teachers, I mean the teachers in the classroom as well as the specialists at the co-op. We have Google Classroom, and everybody knows that. You think, is that a third-party app? Yes, it is. Third-party apps are apps that are not that you originated on your network. You have an agreement with someone to use their app that they developed on your network. So Google Classroom is a third-party app. It's part of the Google suite. Google's third-party. That's why agreements are so important. And I have notes, so in case I go out the rabbit holes, you can try to push me on my notes here. The Kahoot, has anybody done Kahoot? I was going to do Kahoot, but I didn't know if we had the internet or not here, because sometimes it didn't, so I didn't do it. So if y'all want to do Kahoot, we'll try it, but I didn't do it this. We have Flipgrid, Pear Deck. All these are some that the Khan Academy is real big in our Explore Academies. They use that quite a bit. So these are third-party apps plus a lot more. In my Google dashboard, which I'll pull up here in a little bit, I have like 90 something that I've approved or blocked, and then I have like 400 that the people have tried to use that are not configured. Because if an adult on Google uses an app, then they can use it without it being configured. But if someone under 18 tries to use an app, it has to be configured. You either have to trust it or block it in order for them to use it. And so the way I do that is divide my users up, and I'm jumping ahead here. Well, we'll talk about that. So it's important to know also whether you're dealing with 18 or 13-year-olds. That's part of that legal stuff. So one thing I've started doing is I've started trying to tell the specialists when they go out and do PD for teachers that they don't just tell these teachers all these free apps and don't check into them themselves. We don't want to tell teachers to use apps when they're not good apps to be using on our network. I said that would help us as techs if you would just prove or approve that app or let me look at it before you start promoting it to the teachers. So that's something at the co-op level I'm trying to promote. So just so you know, we at the co-op understand your pain as we go through it too. And so that helps as far as it helped them because they didn't really think about it either. To them, a free app is great. It's a tool. And as far as the adults go, no problem. They're willing to accept the problems that come along with it. Then they can go home and they can use it all they want to on their own home network. But when you get on a school network, you've got underage and you've got things that you have to be involved in. So the first question that came to my mind that Bard came up with is, why do teachers use apps? Can't they teach without them? I went to school without them. I'm sure several of y'all went to school without apps. So why can't teachers teach without these? Well, there's some reasons. Here's 4 they came up with, that Bard came up with, but there's more you could probably come up with yourself, but I thought I'd mention these. So the first is that apps can be used across all subject areas. And it gives there's a wide range of tools and resources out there. So access to the apps is one reason teachers use them, because it's easy access. They're out there, they're free, they're available for them to use, so that access is one reason they use them. Another is engagement. Students nowadays are different than when I was a student, I suppose, because they need engagement. They're not the same as sit in the desk, listen to the teacher. They've got to be engaged in things. Apps help with that engagement. You can have lots of games, you can have lots of tools that kids think they're just playing, when in actuality they're learning along with that play. Apps are great tools for that. Differentiation. Teachers have to deal with multiple levels in the same classroom. That's one reason why text help is out there with read, write, and Equatio to help with those reading levels, because there's such diversity in classrooms. Apps help customize lessons and deal with that diversity and allow it to be a level playing field for everyone. Assessment. Everyone loves assessment. Atlas, I think they did a test on Atlas last week at Whitehall, I know, or Pine Bluff did one. And so they're testing to get Atlas running. And so assessment is another thing that teachers don't like to grade papers. Who does? And so there's apps out there to help teachers in grading papers, keeping up with grades, making the results immediately available to students so that you get that feedback immediately. Students love that, teachers love that. So these are just 4 main reasons why teachers use them. So us in IT, we have to go, well, there's lots of risk and challenges involved with these apps. Do they not see that? So this presents several challenges for us in the tech department. Most of these challenges are already present with the use of the internet. So it's not just apps that bring a lot of these challenges about, it's the internet itself that brings these challenges about. So the complexity of security, the data privacy, cost, and integrations with existing systems. These are some IT challenges that we have to face that teachers don't really realize. And that's where there's a little gap, and we're going to talk about that in the team effort part. The one that I want to really focus on in this slide is that laws, standards, and policies. Some people don't understand the difference. There's a big difference between a law and a standard and a policy. A law is put out by a government agency, and there are penalties associated with that law. You've heard several acts today already. Act 504, Act 754. Those are laws that have been put out by our government that we have to follow, and there's penalties involved with those laws. So laws are important, you need to know them. Standards, on the other hand, are where we get those best practices. Standards are things that the industry has looked at and said, okay, all these companies, all these organizations, they have this certain level that they're expecting, and so how do we obtain that? These standards help you get to that level that's expected for all those organizations. Cybersecurity has several standards. We're going to be looking at some. Policies are what you are responsible for. That's what your organization puts in place for your users to follow. Policies are based on standards, best practices, also on laws. But when an auditor comes in, the auditor's not going to look and say, okay, are you following this law? Are you following this standard? They're going to say, are you following your policy? And they're going to look at your policy and see if your policies follow the standards and laws. But are you following your policies? That's the most important piece. So policies are very important, and policies are where these third-party apps come into play. You've got to have policies in place to deal with third-party apps. Because if you don't, all these other complexities start coming into play, where with the policies in place, the other parts are not as big as they could be. I like the one he mentioned about free. The cost is free, really free. That's something in IT we deal with all the time. There's never really free, is there? Like that lunch we had, it wasn't free. I hate to tell you. You paid for it. Okay.
Hey David, I want to have one part on that.
Yes.
Is free really free? So a lot of times they might offer you a free service or a free app, but sometimes they might be looking to gather some of your data in trade for that. So they might be collecting student information. So just kind of keep some of that in the back of your head too. It might be a good idea to have some kind of contract in place even on a free app.
And it's important that the users know that as well. So if the users know what that free is not really free, that free has something tied to it, and they need to know that. So what we're going to look at now are some best practices. I got these best practices from 2 specific locations, and we're diverting from bars at this point. One of these locations was from this magazine, which I don't know if y'all subscribe to this, y'all get this. If you don't, this is a magazine put out by CDW. And so if you go to their booth, they'll probably have some there, and they'll probably show you how to sign up for it, I'm sure. But there's some real good K-12 articles in here, especially to deal with privacy. This one came out just last week, I think, the fall of 2023. And there's an article in here by Steve Smith. He's from Massachusetts. And the state of Massachusetts is one of the first states that put out a state agreement for third-party apps for schools to use. And so there's a real good article in here I was going to point out so you can read that. But that's where these standards or these policies, best practices come from. So we're going to look at some. First, the first one is you need to create policies for approving third-party apps. In other words, you want to make sure that you have an outline for basic criteria of what a third-party app should be. Because teachers, they're a lot more willing to go along with you if you know what you want. If you just tell them what you don't want, then they have problems figuring out what do we need? What will he let us use, or what will she let us use? So you need to come up with an outline of basic criteria that you use to evaluate and approve third-party apps. Then you need to get a buy-in from your district leadership. And this is everybody in the admin office, from the finance people to the business people to the principals. You need to get a buy-in. So, and how do you get buy-in? Well, that's where culture comes into play. And you have to be the nice guy. I know it's hard on Mondays especially. But you have to be the nice guy and try to tell them, we're helping you. This is what we expect our third-party apps to be like, and what we allow. Will you support us? Because once you get their buy-in, then you can publish policies to help teachers understand the process for approval. By the way, under the buy-in, one of the things that they mentioned was you need a point person, not necessarily the IT person. The point person can be in the office. It can be a person that deals with the data, the student data, and that could be a point person. This point person is where people direct their questions and they get their information from, and so it's like a mediator, so to speak, between the teachers and the IT department and making sure everything's working right. That's one of the best practices that they suggested. Publish the policies help you develop a way to build a community, and one way to build a community is for a good communication strategy. How do you communicate what apps teachers are able to use? Did a message come up about this?
It said it was connected to HDMI.
Oh, it's there.
It just said it was connected to HDMI.
Oh. Well, then that's strange. We might have got that. So and then we're gonna publish our criteria to let teachers know what they need to look for before they propose a third-party app. So you want to put out a list of what third-party apps are available that you have approved and that they know they can use. So when they get a third-party app, they can check it against that list before they approach and say, I need this third-party app. And you say, well, it's already on the list. We've already approved that. You can use it. And so you can go ahead and approve it. So building a culture of student data privacy is something we need to prioritize. All this is about student data privacy. And I was thinking about student data privacy a little bit when I was doing this, and one reason why it's important that the student data privacy is so important is we get privacy things in the mail all the time from the banks, from insurance, and we're adults. And it's hard for me to read those things. So, and our data is just as important as the student's data. And if we get things telling us about privacy, students need to know about their privacy as well. They need to know that we're keeping their data private for them and why that's important. So that's part of that communication strategy, is to make sure you communicate those thoughts. The next, go away. I don't know why it keeps doing that. I think we're connected to these other ones over here. They may be seeing our presentation too. Number 2 is use well-defined evaluation criteria for approving third-party apps. So when you come up with a criteria, you need to use well-defined evaluation criteria. Here are some things that you should consider for third-party apps. First, is there a reasonable educational purpose for using the app? Is it just to pass the time, or is it to actually help them in reading and math and science? That's one of the criteria that you need to have. 2, is the app from a reputable company or app developer? Is it one of these fly-by-night companies, or is it one that's been around the block? You can tell by going to their website and looking at the privacy policy if they're prepared. Most of the ones that I've dealt with, except the few, I've lost a few. The ones I've allowed through all say that they are FERPA, COPA, they mention all the laws, they tell you exactly what they do with student data, how long they keep it. Most of the reputable ones know what you're expecting. Third one is what app permissions are required. When you authorize an app in Google, it tells you, are they wanting just Google Classroom? Are they wanting Google Drive? Are they wanting email? What are they wanting access to in Google? And you can see that whenever you go in to approve or not approve an app. Fourth, it's what data is collected and how is it stored. Their privacy policy is going to tell you that. Every one of them have a privacy policy. It's the law. The law, standard policy, that's law, that's a law. So if you go on their website and go down, usually at the very bottom of their main site, there's going to be a link to a privacy policy or privacy of some sort. Click that and go to the agreement. I know they're hard to read. Don't do it late at night, because it will put you to sleep. But you need to read those. You need to read through them. I forced myself to start reading them, and I have been shocked at some of the things that some of them say. I have blocked two just last week because they said on there, we do not want under 18 users using our app. Students were wanting to use it. They had asked permission in Google. Whenever they want to use one, it comes up in my Google dashboard, and I have to say, I have to configure access. So I'm like, why did they ask to use it if they knew it was going to be under 18? Well, it might be a 17-year-old that feels like they're 35. I remember those days. When you were, senior in high school, the world was before you, and you thought you could just do it all. Well, you can't do it on the network. On the school network, especially.
We ran into that last week with a virtual Arkansas.
Oh.
You go to and want this whitelisted, and you go to a policy and it says, you just gotta be 18 or older. Why would virtual Arkansas have that?
And see, that's a question we need to bring that up, mention that. Somebody that slipped through, most likely. So, somebody needs to bring that up to them. I'm sure they might change what apps they use if they knew what was in them. They're like all of them. I used to just skip through those privacy things and not read them until this Google thing came up, and I started having to look at them all the time. And then I'm going, why are they using that one? And it's no telling how long they've been using it. But now it's getting caught. And I'm like, okay, I need to be looking at this a little better. I need to get more serious about it, because these are some things that the students expect me to keep their data private. And if that's what's required, then that's what I'm going to do. And we're going to talk about that in just a minute, that it's not a lone man show. It's not just me doing it. We all should be wanting our data private for our students in the school district. Teachers, parents want it private. Administrators want it. All of us should want it. And then we're looking at process. Is the vendor FERPA and COPA certified? FERPA and COPA, I know y'all heard of those. FERPA, COPA, and HIPAA. Those are all those laws that we talked about. Those laws are specific in the way they want you to deal with student data. You have to get parental consent for student data under those laws. It's required. It's been that way for years. We've just kind of looked the other way. We've just said, it's not that important. I'm a parent and I would consent, so why? But we need to take it serious. We need parental consent for third-party apps that deal with our data, student data. Because they expect us to be stewards of that data. So, the third one is formalize your evaluation and approval process. It's one thing to have criteria and a process, it's another thing to formalize it. In other words, you need to publish and let everyone know how we're dealing with third-party apps and what we're doing. So you need to keep record of decisions, documentation. Who was it that loved documentation?
Our guy Lucas Evans, our new guy.
Yes, he loved that, and it's important. Documentation is your friend when it comes to these decisions like this. So we need to keep our record of decisions. Use an online form to allow submittal of apps for review and approval. So that's like Google Form. You just use a Google Form for approval, and that way you have a record in a spreadsheet of when they asked for it, what your decision was. All that's really easy to keep up with. Schedule regular meetings for reviewers to approve or deny. Notice I said reviewers. It's not just you reviewing, you're supposed to have several people, a team that you put together to review these apps. And you don't do it on a daily basis. You do it on a timeline that you have agreed to at your school district. So like once a month, you have a meeting. All these apps need to be approved or not approved. We've vetted them or we've not vetted them. Here's what they say. Okay, yes, we approve them, we don't approve them. So, and then, and then letting people know that this is what was decided from this group. So you have teachers at the table, you have administrators at the table, you have everyone at the table making these decisions. Share the process with stakeholders. The stakeholders include admin, teachers, staff, parents, students. Students are stakeholders. I know it's hard for me to imagine some of these students being stakeholders, but they are. They have their data, it's their data, it's not my data, it's their data, and I'm trying to protect it. They need to know that's what we're doing. And then publish when a decision will be made. So if somebody puts in, I want this app approved, you publish. Well, we meet on the third Thursday of each month. You will have an approval or disapproval by that Friday. So you just publish it and let them know, so they don't have to keep bugging you. Then this next one is ensure software settings are properly configured. This is where the IT comes in. We have to make sure that our settings are configured properly. All the main players, Google and Microsoft, have settings for you to deal with third-party apps. Google's came to light on October 23rd. They've been there all this time. It's just, I never used them. I don't know of many people that used them, but some people were using them. So now I'm using them because they put it to the forefront. Microsoft has the same tools. So you can think, well, it's just a Google problem. No, Microsoft and third-party apps are just the same players as Google and third-party apps. They have tools in Microsoft as well. And you especially have to be careful in Microsoft with Azure and all your third-party cloud that you can do with your servers and such. Because that's your data going up in the cloud to who knows where. So you have to make sure your settings are set properly and use the settings. Now, Google, I'm going to talk about Google because that's what I'm familiar with. We're a Google co-op, and we have Google school districts. And I know some of you might be Microsoft. How many Microsoft do we have? Oh, there's a Microsoft. We love you just the same. We're not, in fact, where I used to work, and I didn't tell you about background, I've been in lots of careers. I was a dispatcher for the railroad. That was a real interesting job. Lots of stories on that one. But one time I was at a college, and at a college we used Microsoft. So we are a total Microsoft. In fact, we tried Google for a while, but we decided Google wasn't for us. We were going Microsoft. And that's when K-12 split and went Google instead of Microsoft, it seemed. But they both work real similar. There's not they all have the pros and cons. So we're going to talk about Google today. And Google updated their security features for users under 18. Now the first thing is, how do they know which users are under 18? Well, you have to tell them. We identify which users are under 18 by putting them in certain organizational units. When you put, like I have organizational units set up for all of my schools, like Explore Academy, my Flex Academy, my Focus Academy. And when I put a user under that OU, it identifies them as being under 18. That's when all these under 18 rules can apply to that user. Otherwise, if you're just a co-op user and you're out here in adult land, you don't get all these things applied to it. So that's why it's important to have your OU set up properly so that you know what is under 18 so that Google will know and then they'll apply. The changes that they put in place in October forced the admins, which, you know, it's you know, us IT people, or it might not be, some people use other admins, but they forced admins to be specific and intentional about what data they're allowing their users to access. Google has always had app access controls in place, but we weren't forced to put them on users. We were allowed to, but we weren't forced to. Now we're forced to. Apps can be either trusted, limited, or blocked. And the way I deal with it is when one comes up, and we're gonna look at that. Let me pull up. So we're gonna look at this. This is hard for y'all to see, I know. But this is the Google admin screen here. Most of y'all are familiar with it. You've seen the dashboard before. This is mine. I did screenshots because I didn't know what the internet was gonna be like at this place. You never know. So I went ahead and did screenshots. But we can pull up, I think the internet's okay. We might pull up a real live demo if we have time. But here's my dashboard. Over in this middle section here, you'll see app access control. And here is just happened to be a random day. I don't know what day this was. And I've got one app pending review, one user has requested it. In other words, a user tried to access an app using Google, and that app asked for their Google login information. You know, you've all done it before when you tried to get to Facebook and it said use Google. But when you click on that use Google, you're using a third-party app trying to use your Google data. It's going to Google and pulling that data. It can pull lots of different data. And you can see it once you start reviewing it. So today, on this particular case, a user requested an app. I don't know who that user is. I really don't care. All I know is, oh, another thing is when it shows up here, I know it's someone under 18. Because it would not ask my permission if it was someone over 18. They can do they're responsible adults with their data. Students are not responsible, but they have data. So they require us to be the responsible party here. Because you know students, they're kind of irresponsible sometimes. So here we go. So I said, okay, I've got to do something with this. So I clicked on review apps. And when I did, it came up with this screen. You'll notice that there's Google services, there's an app pending review. That was the one that just came up. And then I've got 94 configured apps. So I've had 94 come through that I've had to say trust, limit, or block. I have 419 that have been accessed. We're going 419, 94, doesn't add up. 419 of all the apps from the adults and the students. 94 of them I've configured. The other ones I haven't configured. I don't have to as long as a student doesn't use it. When a student uses it, I've got to configure it because I'm forced to. Now I can go in and configure these apps. And I have most of them. And I've gone through and looked at them because first off, I got real curious. What are these things? What are people doing on my network? And so this is a really good tool to see what your users are actually doing and whether you want them to or not. But in this case, here we have an app. This came up, it said a Samsung account. It showed it was verified. In other words, Google has verified that this app actually was written by that company. It doesn't verify that it meets your privacy policies. It just verifies that Google knows it's a real app from a real company that Google recognizes. I've gotten some that are not verified. And you go to their website and you're going, who are these people? Those I generally block. And then it'll come up here, it's got the ID, it's got an one of the organizational units is asking for it, one user is asking for it. And here's what it's requesting. This is what that app is requesting. It wants Google sign in and other. So you can go in here and go to this, and it'll actually tell you what that app is requesting. So here we come up, I've said configure access, and now I come up here, here's the app, and here's where I can look and see what the organization is. If I scroll over here, because I have several organizations, it'll tell me what organizational unit is asking for this app. Generally, if it's my K-8 Virtual Academy, I will email that person that's with that academy and tell them, somebody's wanting to use this app, is it okay? And they'll tell me yes or no. If it's one of my other academies, I'll do the research, because I'm more the responsible party. But they have a person at the K-8 Virtual Academy. It's not the Virtual Academy you mentioned. We have a K-8 Virtual Academy in our co-op. And then we have the Virtual Academy, Arkansas Virtual Academy, which is high school. And so, and generally the Virtual Academy, most of them, I'll approve, because based on what they tell me. The others, I will look up. I will go and find out, what is this app? What's their privacy policy? So here I've checked, that's okay. If I check that organizational unit, you can add up to 10 organizational units. So if you want to include others as well, like you want to include all of my academies, if one's just requested it, but all of them are going to eventually need this, I can go ahead and add them in, up to 10 of them. If it's more than 10, you have to do a bulk upload, which I do bulk uploads generally anyway, because it's just easier. I have a spreadsheet, a CSV spreadsheet, I'll put the information there and I just upload it to Google. But it's easier going on the screen. But I did this so we can do it here. So then I'm going to click on configure access. So I go here, it comes here, and it says, okay, here's the application, here's the organizational units you selected, one. Now we'll click next. It makes you walk through a lot of steps. And then here's where I have to decide. Trusted, limited, or blocked. Trusted means that the app can request access to all Google data. Whatever the app wants, I trust it, it can have all of it. Limited means the app can request access to unrestricted Google data. So there may be Google data that you've restricted, because you can restrict certain Google data that will not be available. So you can put limited, or you can block it. They can't request access to any Google data. Those are the only three choices you get. So I can't remember if I blocked this one or trusted. Well, we'll see here. I blocked this one because it was a Samsung account which wanted a student have a phone trying to access their Google data when we don't allow phones on our campus. And I went, And so I go ahead, if I have a I block. And then if it's not a then I say, okay, maybe, and then if I'm really not sure, I'll block it, and then I'll go check, because you can go back and change it. This is not a permanent selection. You can unselect and change your selection. So if you decide, well, really should have allowed that, then you can go back and change it, limited or trusted. So this day I blocked this one. Because one of our lovely students. Then it's going to come here. And this is the question, it's been on the listserv, everybody's up in arms. Parental consent. You mean we have to get parental consent for all third-party apps? It's always been that way, folks. The law's been there. FERPA, COPA, they've all required parental consent. We just overlooked it. So Google is saying, okay, are you getting the parental consent according to your policies? They're not forcing you to get parental consent. According to the Google agreement, which I printed out the Google agreement just to make sure, it says, about parental consent is way back here in the back. It's a new section in the Google agreement that you sign to be able to use the free Google service for education. I know. Who read this? But I did now. I did now. And so there's a section back here. So in North America, all regions excluding Brazil. Why they exclude Brazil, I don't know. But it's a new section. It's about COPA and parental consent. And you say if a customer allows end users under the age of 13 to use services, customer consent as required under the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act to the collection and use of personal information in the services described in the Google Workspace for Education Privacy Notice from such end users to the extent COPA is applicable in customer's jurisdiction. In other words, if your parents question it, then you have to get their consent. And we deal with this with grades, with lunch counts. I mean, this is nothing that your office has not already been dealing with. That's why you need to get friends with them and find out what data are we supposed to be protecting, because I'm certainly having to make these decisions. And we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But anyway, so this says, if your end users are under the age of 18, your organization may be required. May be required. It's up to the organization. Google should say, this maybe it's something that your organization required to get parental consent for allowing these users to use third-party services. Some people have put out the list on the website. This Act 754, SD, I've got it on the slide here. That it's a real good tool because parents can go there to see what you've got what software agreements you've got in place between you and your vendors for third parties. So anyway, you're going to confirm. It's going to come back over here. Here's the list of the apps and whether I've configured it or not, and whether it's been blocked and you can print a list of this. You can download the list so you can get print a list and get your list. Any questions about the Google? Have y'all been dealing with this? Mm-hmm. It's pretty straightforward. I didn't expect near as many as I've had to deal with. It was a shock to me, personally. I'm like, I did not know they were using that many.
I think its default is blocked anyway, right?
Do what now?
The default is blocked for the apps, correct? So before you go approval or denial, they're already kind of like denied.
Yes, they're not configured, is what they say. They're non-configured, so they can't access it. They'll get a little blurb. In fact, you can customize a little blurb they get. But they get a little blurb saying that you need to contact your admin to configure this app, configure access to this app. And students, they recognize it now. The first time it occurred, I had a teacher call me in a panic, and she sent me a screenshot. This is what it's saying. They don't do that anymore.
Can't you also, through the admin console, direct them to a specialized store page for Google Apps that you've already approved?
Well, that's where you can download the list, and that's where your communication with your teachers is so important.
Well, I mean, like, you have it populate whenever they try to go to store.google to go to your specialized page.
And that's the automation part.
Oh, yeah.
Which are just right there. Perfect. So here we have automate the approval process. So your friend is automation, because this is a process you have to go through. And so use automated tools. Use online forms, use updated websites, use your ticketing system. they can put a ticket in if they wanna get an app approved. You can have a special ticket for that. So, and you can send it to somebody that's not even on IT, it's just part of the approval process. And we're on our time numbers. So let me rush through here. So, post pre-approved list, that's what I'm talking about. Post it, give teachers choices, communicate with the stakeholders, learn from others. This is what I was trying to come up with, the Student Data Privacy Consortium. That organization is where you can piggyback off of other people's agreements. I think they turned it on.
Right at the limit. You're done.
That is funny.
But those last two sites, which it should come up here shortly, those last two sites that are on here, and those are places you can go to see the apps that have been pre-approved by organizations, third-party organizations. Common sense privacy evaluations, and iKeepSafe, they have the apps already out there, and they vetted them already. So you can go to those websites and find out if that app's been approved or not without having to go read their policy. The IT best practices from the Arkansas legislature, most of you know from those. These things that we've gone through, they're in there. So they're part of this best practice. So, teamwork. We all have to be teamed together. And it requires administrators, because they make the policies, they support our team. The IT directors, we communicate the policies, and we educate the users. That's
I wish you had a QR code.
I forget,
Even.
we forget a lot, is to educate our users. Teachers, they know to know what apps needed and know privacy policies. Yes, they need to know them just like we do. Students, they need to know about protecting your data. Put up blurbs on your digital signage about protecting your data. Students need to know they have data that needs to be protected. They're smart. They're learning calculus and trig and all these things. They can surely learn about protecting data.
Oh.
They know how to get through it.
That's right. And then parents. Parents
They said that I was gonna do one, I forgot already.
that the school is protecting their students' information. So, thank you. And there's my email address.
That's not till 10 o'clock.
Thank you.
Thank you. Absolutely.